Hello history buffs and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe Eastwood. I'm a public historian, and during this whole quarantine situation I've been playing a lot of Civilization. Now Civilization is something that we talked about in grad school. It is a representation of world history of a sort. So we learned about how to interpret specifically the version of Civilization that is about colonization and imperialism. Now this isn't the version that I'm playing. I have Civilization V. I used to play Civilization 4, but I don't know where that's gotten to, and I like 5 better anyway. Except for the theme song, obviously. So I figured because I've been playing it so much, I should probably do something productive with all that time and make a video about it. So this video doesn't have a thesis exactly, but it is a collection of thoughts that I've had about the game as pertaining to history and the historic process. So first off, my playstyle doesn't target any of the win conditions. It's not particularly productive towards the play conditioning that you're supposed to strive towards a UN victory or military victory or any of the other win conditions. Instead, I play as if happy is a win condition, so routinely I'll be winning things like likes shiny things the most, and her people are the happiest and most wonderful, because I just want to make all of the wonders and the opera houses and the theaters and get all the gems and the gold. I want my people to be happy. This desire for my civilizations to be happy also spills over into other areas. For example, if I have a unit garrisoned in a city for a while, I will send them to somewhere else so that they can see more of the world. The way people have described being in the military to me, the thing that most people talk about is their ability to travel, what they do in their time off, things that they get to see that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. And even though these are just units in a game, I want them to see the world and to have the best life that they possibly can. I'm also inclined to build my national wonders in small out-of-the-way cities because there's no rush in order to get a national epic. It's not like another country is going to take it before I can finish it. So world wonders I'll build in my capital and the big early cities. National wonders, I just want people who live in the small out-of-the-way places to have something nice too. I just want everybody to have a good life, and while happy isn't a win condition, maybe it should be. Another value that's worked its way into my playstyle is diversity. I think that having as many city-states and empires as possible is a good thing. I hate it when people get wiped off the map, and if somebody does, I am probably the most likely to go in and restore ownership of that city to its original owner. Now, in addition to being idealistic, there is a utilitarian side to this. Now, one time I was playing as Japan, and I was all over here, and then in the middle I had Britain and France, and then over here there was Mongolia, and Mongolia they'd already eaten up China, and they were starting to eat up at Britain, and I kept giving aid to Britain because I didn't want Britain to fall, because if Britain falls, Mongolia is going to come after me, and I don't want that. I want to live over here and get my gems and my iron and everything, just live my life, build the wonders. So as long as I sent them aid, I could let them take the brunt of the force. So that's not very nice, but I would rather they existed. So idealistic, utilitarian. Now this game does rub up against my values a little bit in how it plays back, especially with the barbarian function in the early game. You do pretty much have to go after the barbarians no matter who you play, because if you don't, they're going to keep spawning and they're going to come after you. They're going to attack your workers. They're going to attack your city. You don't want this. And with some of the civilizations, I'm totally okay going after the barbarians. Like for example, when I play Rome, I'm going to assume the barbarians look like this, and I've got no problem with going after people who look like this. Now, I do feel a little bit squicky when I play as the United States, especially, but also Britain and France a little bit, when I go after the barbarians, because it just feels a little bit like genocide. Like, it just has genocidal undertones for me. And the way that the game has you play, you've got to go after them. It's not really a choice. but I still feel a little bit uncomfortable. Now, to go back to the Rome example where the barbarians, I'm assuming, look like this, there's a corollary with the German Empire where if you go after the barbarians, they actually join your side. Now, I love this mechanic because the barbarian tribes of the ancient Roman era looked like this, and also the word barbarian comes from a mockery of what Germanic people sounded like. Bar, 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 bar. Bar, 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 bar. Bar, 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 bar. Bar, bar, bar? Bar, 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 bar. Is how I imagine that conversation going. So that's one of my favorite mechanics, is because the barbarians and the Germans really aren't that dissimilar. Another way this game rubs up against my values is that I really believe in home rule and self-rule. So when a city gets taken over by another nation, I just feel uncomfortable. I'm like, I know this isn't how the game works, but I just feel for the people who grew up speaking one language and now there was a military takeover of their home. They have to learn another language. They might even be second-class citizens if they live in a puppet state. I just feel for them. This is why I never annex a puppet, and unless I'm attacked, I don't go after other people's territories. If somebody attacks me, you better believe I go in there and I get their capital. But it's not because I want their land, and I do annex them. I annex them fully. They get full citizenship. Everything is as good as it can possibly be. I do this surgically, and I end the war as fast as I possibly can because I don't want people's taxes going to pay for prolonged wars, and I don't want people to have to live under the stress of seeing foreign troops walking through their land. It's not the civilians' fault, and they shouldn't have to deal with that. So just like I try and respect the lives and the lifestyle of the military units, I also try to respect the lives, the stress levels, and the certainty that my civilian characters have as well. In the past, I used to go to war against nations that have taken over cities and completely wiped other civilizations off the map. And I like to restore those back to the original leader, just so that the people living in those cities get to be ruled by the people they want to be ruled by. They get to live in the culture they were born into. They get to speak the language that they spoke their whole life. They get to live in accordance to the values. Their tax money goes to the right capital. Just everything should be that. I want that for them. However, that did nothing for my popularity with the United Nations. I alienated all of my trade partners, and everybody thought that I was a hostile warmonger. And yeah, it turns out that perception is everything, and it doesn't matter how good your intentions are if they think that you're going to go to war at a drop of a hat. Other world leaders are going to read whatever they want into your actions, and that is when I stopped liberating cities. I could not care at that point. You know what? If they're going to be more mad at me for liberating a city than for just leaving it all be, okay, whatever, I'll leave it be. Now, this isn't so much a value that the game rubs up against as it is something I just love. I love the way that the nuclear bomb is used in this game. I used it one time. It was so harrowing, it was so creepy, it was so ghastly. The whole screen is this vibrant and variant orange, and I just get this oh God, did I just do that? It felt like a war crime, and the ground was poison after that. And then there was this added fact that back at home, everybody was still happy. They were still going to the theater, they were still going to see the Circus Maximus. I was really appalled. Because it made me think, do they not know? Are they just so unaffected by war crimes that I'm doing across the globe that they're still having a good life? And I stopped doing war crimes after that. That was a bad feeling. And I think that Civilization does a good job at really encapsulating a little bit of this, the creepy dissonance that can go on when it comes to foreign wars. I did not like it, but I did like it. But I didn't like the feeling, but I really liked the execution. And the last big value that I have that gets rubbed up against a little bit in this game is the use of plantations. I've heard it both ways, but in the history world, plantation means slavery. Farms is not slavery. So they could produce the same thing, but if there's slave labor, it's a plantation. If it's yeoman farmers or a community garden or anything like that, it's a farm. Now, I personally value freedom. And as the benevolent ruler of my civilization, I feel that the plantation mechanic can be tweaked just a little bit. Since the pandemic started, I've played a few score hours of Civilization, and I have some thoughts, some recommendations, some tweaks. The first mechanic I'd like to change up a little bit is going to be the plantation mechanic. The big thing is that I think a ruler should be able to choose whether or not there's slavery in the empire. And since the big difference is slavery, maybe you get more happiness if you choose to farm your spices instead of have a plantation, but maybe you take a hit in how much gold you get. I feel like that's a good trade-off, and then you get to say that you didn't do any slavery. My second tweak would be to the wonders mechanic, since any civilization can make any wonder regardless of context. When I used to play Civilization 4 back in the day, I would only ever build the wonders that my civilization was supposed to have, and it used to skeeve me out when civilizations went after wonders that weren't supposed to be theirs. In the real world, wonders represent the history, the culture, the innovations, and the context of the civilization at hand. I had two ideas for how to adjust the wonders mechanic. One would be to make it take longer to make a wonder if it wasn't your nation's wonder. The second one would be to make the wonder just a little bit less effective if it was out of context. The purpose of this is to reflect that cultural accomplishments don't happen in a vacuum, and their significance is going to be most apparent when they're in context. Number 3, I actually love that each civilization gets its own tailored specifications just for its culture and history. However, I think this could actually be taken a step further for greatest effect. For example, maybe Britain has an easier time getting to the industrial age, but as soon as you hit the industrial age, you have to immediately start worrying about food shortages all the time. Also, right now, India uses cows as a food resource, but if I was designing the game, I would say if you're playing India, it gets treated the same as the wine and incense resources, so it has more of a cultural significance rather than for food. You could even say that once the monastery is built, you get even more culture from it. And then one thing I really liked in Civilization 4 is the fact that you could pick which leader. I think it would be cool if the choice in leader actually had some impact over your play style and what kind of bonuses your culture is going to get. For example, when you play China, you play as Wu Zetian and you get lots of military bonuses. But what if you could play as Sung Mei Ling and you get a lot of diplomacy and culture bonuses? Or when you play as Washington, you get Manifest Destiny, you could see further. But what if you could choose to play Eisenhower and you get a production bonus? Number 4 is that not all civilizations are the same age, and as you play the game, sometimes civilizations get wiped off the map. My suggestion is that when an empire gets wiped off the map, you add a new empire into the mix. I have 3 different recommendations for how this might be done. Maybe the biggest and most advanced city-state gets promoted to being an empire, and they get to make new states and compete with us to win. As we know, something that I care about a lot is making sure that the empire is happy. When an empire gets too big, sometimes it loses happiness points. And so the second suggestion would be to break an empire in half if it's the least happy, and now you've got 2 civilizations who are both now competing to win the game. And third, you can also just spawn a new civilization. When you play from the industrial era, you start out with 3 settlers, a whole bunch of infantry, and you start the game from there. I think that the game could easily just like, push, here's Egypt, have fun, and just roll with that. Now, in order for any of these 3 to have a fighting chance, there should be some initial bonuses that wear off over time as they get their footing in the world, but any of these would be actually pretty realistic to how the world is. You get lots of countries coming in and leaving all the time. And then my final suggestion has to do with the technologies. In Civilization, technology is fairly linear. You have to learn the early technologies before you advance to the later technologies. But this isn't how life works. Sometimes we develop things and we think they're technologies and they straight up aren't. So my suggestion for the game is that you have to get a certain amount of bogus technologies before you can advance to the real technologies. Now, I don't think that you should have to get all of the bogus technologies, and I don't think that you should necessarily have to get the bogus technologies before you advance to the real technologies. However, I think it would be realistic if you had to learn things like Ptolemaic theory and phrenology along the way. Actually, I think Ptolemaic theory is a really interesting example because if you learn it and then you try to switch to heliocentric theory, you're going to get some resistance, and now I'm starting to think in really, really complicated terms. But the point is that throwing some bogus technologies into the technology tree is so realistic. And with all that said, I think the real success of Civilization isn't any one choice that it made, but the fact that it got me thinking so deeply and creatively. It really got me thinking in a nuanced way about questions like, what are the win conditions of being a people? And what, if any, are the justifiable reasons to go to war? To me, that's a whole lot more valuable than if this game was more historically based. The point of the game for me is just to keep making the next right decisions for my citizens and my playstyle. My playstyle will undoubtedly change, and maybe I'll even make a new video about that, but for right now, I just want to make my citizens happy. And that's all I've got. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notifications bell, and let me know in the comments below what is your favorite part of playing Civilization. Until next time, make history.